I'm currently doing a month-long deep dive into the MaryEl Tarot. And how I like to learn a new tarot deck in my collection is I pair it with a book. And at the end of every chapter, I will pull 3 tarot cards, and then I'll sit and I'll reflect on how the messages in the tarot reading connect with the topics or the themes in the chapter that I just read. It's a really fun way to get to know a deck for the first time and to just kind of open your mind to the ideas of what could be in a deck, and also some ideas in a really interesting book. So the book that I chose is called Women Who Run with the Wolves, and it's written by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And the way that this book is written is she takes a collection of myths and different stories, and then after sharing each myth, she adds her own Jungian, psychology and analyst to that myth and what it can teach us about being a woman, being a wild woman, our own internal voice and such. It's a very interesting book so far, and I just finished chapter 3. So chapter 3 was about how do we develop intuition? We talk about intuition as this internal knowing, this internal compass, this ability to listen to ourselves, but how do we actually develop it? And why do some people have it and some people don't? So the 3 cards that I pulled for chapter 3 were the 6 of Discs, the 7 of Swords, and the Strength. Now, in the MaryEl Tarot, as I was reading the guidebook, she has a slightly different interpretation of these cards than your normal Rider-Waite-Smith interpretation. So this is another way that I like to get to know a brand new deck, is I want to learn the deck through the eyes of the artist, not just what I know about tarot, but when I have a brand new deck, I want to know what the creator thinks about tarot, what inspired them to illustrate archetypes in the way that they did. So in the guidebook of the MaryEl Tarot, she explains the 7 of Swords, instead of being as something like deceitful or lying like typical Rider-Waite-Smith, she explains it as free will and the creative force of choice and the dynamics of free will on a situation and having the courage to choose whether it be right or wrong in a certain situation. Likewise, for the 6 of Discs, she talks about perfection and beauty, and the beauty in the imperfections and the dichotomy of human creation. Now, the Strength card is very similar to the RWS meaning, meaning strength, compassion, fortitude, and courage. So as I was reading chapter 3 and I was thinking about these themes, there was a lot of parallels between the mythological story that the author used as an example and some of these key concepts. And I wanted to just kind of summarize them for you. There's more information on my blog. I'm going to be writing like a blog in more detail. It's on my website, which is lilytarot.com. But overall, I just wanted to give you a quick synopsis of these 3 cards and how it relates to the topic of developing our own intuition. So the first card, of course, the 6 of Discs. When I was looking at that artwork, I noticed it's a woman and she's carrying what looks to be like a genie, like a lamp that a genie would come out of. And there's this like flame, this orange flame that's coming out that she's listening to. She's looking right at the genie. And to me, this really represents our intuition. But whether you view intuition as an external knowing or an internal knowing, I think it's beautifully represented in this card, the 6 of Discs, by this genie in the lamp concept. And when we think about perfection and harmony and the very humanness of being human, why do we need intuition at all? It's because we are imperfect beings. We are people who make mistakes. We're all on that journey of growth and discovery. And so as we're on that quest of knowledge, whether it be, external textbook knowledge that you would get in a class, or whether it's internal spiritual knowledge like intuition, as we are on that quest for knowledge and understanding, that's part of our perfection or imperfection as being humans. It's part of our journey of growth. The next card is the Seven of Swords, and the artist illustrated this by a raven stealing an emerald from a white snake. And in Chapter 3 of Women Who Run with Wolves, the concept of free will and self-autonomy and how we decide to listen to our intuition or not ultimately boils down on whether or not we have it. So in the text, basically the author explains that some people have intuition, some people don't, but it all boils down to whether or not you choose to listen. Like, a voice is not going to speak if there's no ear to hear. And so we all have to essentially take personal accountability for ourselves and our practice. Are we going to lean into the knowing? Are we going to practice our spiritual craft? Are we going to develop our personal selves or not? And one of the really cool concepts she talks about in Chapter 3 is she talks about the false self. So in the story, she talks about this girl. She's trying to impress her stepmother and her stepsisters by constantly being good. She never complains. She's always does what she's told. She's constantly trying to appease other people. And in a dichotomous way of trying to be so appeasing and so perfect, people start to resent her. Her stepmother and her stepsisters start to resent her because she's just so accommodating and so perfect, and she's nauseating. And when this girl puts on her false self, which is the self that is trying so hard to get others to like her, she ends up suffocating and neutering her own internal self. She ends up blocking that genie of her own internal wisdom, her own intuitive voice, and she's not listening. And so I think this is very interesting when we talk about the path of developing one's intuition and how it ultimately boils down to free will. Because you can have intuition. You could have intuition passed on from your ancestors or your lineage, or, whatever your spiritual development might be, that sense of knowing. But if you don't choose to nurture that spiritual sense or develop that voice, develop those senses to hear your own authentic voice, then if you're constantly spending your time and energy on your false self, you're never, ever going to develop that deeper level of knowledge and wisdom and understanding of your own true self. You cannot do that while also having a facade or also having a false self that you're putting on for other people. And the final card I pulled is Strength. And I feel like Strength is a card that needs no introduction here. That we know that any journey that we take on, especially a journey that we decide with our own free will, requires courage. It requires strength, the bravery of that first step. And when we decide to drop the masks of our false self and listen to our true inner voice and say, hey, what is the real path that I should be going on? What is my true purpose? That requires courage. And that's, I think, the reason why not many people actually go on that path, that spiritual development, that internal knowing, is because it's scary. It's scary and it requires courage. Courage is a ton of work and it can be very intimidating and it requires a lot of effort. So in conclusion, for Chapter 3, the development of our own intuition, learning how to drop our false selves, learning how to connect with our authentic voice, and following our own intuition as we see fit, as our free will may choose, ultimately requires strength and internal compassion. Anyway, that is my reflections of the MaryEl Tarot and Chapter 3 of Women Who Run with the Wolves. If you are doing a deck study with me and you're reading this book or working with the MaryEl Tarot, I would love to hear your thoughts. And till next time on Chapter 4. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.